Hey, all my friends, what is happening? Welcome once again to the Everyday Missionary Podcast. This is episode 319, and yes, I'm finally dropping a pod, man. I keep just like looking and laughing. Like, I used to be so rhythmic in these things, right? And it was like boom, boom, boom. We got the 300 and a normal way if you're dropping them weekly. And now the last 19, I don't know. It's been, 3 years worth of dropping 19? I don't know. It's not been that bad. I know. It's been like probably 8-9 months since I've been consistent. Nonetheless, I was going to drop one 2 weeks ago, didn't happen. I was going to drop one last week, didn't happen. Then I was going to drop one today, happening. Look at that, go figure. And then the crazy thing is, like, next week I'm bouncing a little bit, and the week after that I'm bouncing again because it's my 35th wedding anniversary, and so Ellen and I are going to be doing some stuff and everything else, and so I may not be behind the tealish blue microphone for another couple weeks, but then again, I might be able to drop one on Monday, so it might be like almost like back-to-back in under 7 days. We're going to see. But then in that second trip that Ellen and I are taking, we're going to Cancun, and I'm going to go to Cancun. I'm going to come back like a Scotsman, fried red, and then immediately go into stuff to get ready for Sunday, and so it may be July before I drop a third one after this one, and next week's, I don't know, we'll see. Whatever else, man. So I know you're not here to hear me babble about that stuff. There's all kinds of things going on in the world, all kinds of things that can be talked about, but again, this is the Everyday Missionary Podcast, and so with that, something, my man Dave Clark, so again, shout out to Dave Clark, he tosses me things every once in a while where I'm like, yeah, I should talk about that, but he tossed me one where he's like, dude, I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this. And so in episode 319, I'm going to talk about some stuff that happened here in the greater Seattle area just in the last like week and a half-ish. I'm going to put it right in that timeline. But it is an organization called Mayday USA. And so I'm going to talk about Mayday USA, culture warriors, and the upside down way of Jesus, and how I think the upside down way of Jesus calls us to something different than what I'm seeing kind of Christian culture warriors do, what I watched there with Cal Anderson Park here in Seattle, what happened with this Mayday USA group, and kind of some people on the left of different kind of stripes, a conflict that they had and everything else, which I'll unpack this all in a minute. But I want to talk about that, like, not so much because of it itself. Like, that's not my thing. Like, part of it is, the event gives you an opportunity to dissect it and go, okay, as a follower of Jesus, what can I learn from this thing? What things are like Jesus? What things are not like Jesus? How do we respond like Jesus in a culture that doesn't care for Jesus? And how did Jesus tell us to interact and reply to all those kinds of things? And so that's the spirit of what I'm really doing here. And I say all of that because here's the thing. I know we live in shock jock world today as far as like online. Everybody's looking for their position. They're taking a side. They're vilifying one side and idolizing the other side. And, oh, these poor people, they were just so innocent. And these people were so terrible. And I find that life is much more nuanced than that. That's one part of this whole thing. I think the other part of this whole thing that I kind of care about is I'm not into like naming names to name names, or I'm not into pointing at churches that I might not agree with just because I'm trying to get points with people who would agree maybe more with me. That's really not my intention, right? If anything, my heart is to kind of lower the salsa level to at least medium or mild, even in kind of assessment. But I don't want the assessment to be like a self-righteous assessment, but I do want it to be a Jesus-centric assessment, especially because I think if you're really passionate about seeing the world changed by the power of what Jesus communicates to us, if you want to really see the kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, then you have to do things in kingdom ways. And I think that's my concern on this and many topics right now, where I think I see the amalgamation of Christianity and politics is, I think it's big P politics, little c Christianity that's driving the boat, so to speak. It's not big C Christianity and little p politics, because I do think that Christianity should have voice in our structure, our society, our cultural borders, which is then issues of politics and things of that nature. And so I'm not an advocate that says we shouldn't be a part of it and get out of it. At the same time, I get very concerned that in the quest for a certain type of ethic and politic, we co-opt Jesus very loosely. More than anything else, we're co-opting kind of the Christian ethic, but even there, it's a very honed, very narrow view of that. And then we're trying to use that as a pry bar to get extra people on our side, people that are more religiously affiliated, maybe a little bit more sensitive to being pro-Christian faith, and we're trying to get them as little foot soldiers into a cause that is in fact more political than it is Christ-centered. And that's probably why I get a little bit more like, okay, I'm going to analyze this and try to break it down a little bit. And from that, kind of highlight what I think went wrong with some of this, and how I think it misses a giant mark of what Jesus actually calls us to do. And all you have to do is begin to peruse through the New Testament, right? Just Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, for example. And you'll see that kind of the way the whole thing shook out is kind of contrary to what Jesus told us to do, but it's all saturated in this idea of Christianity. So I know that's a lot of stuff saying it that way, but let me give you the backstory. So you may not be familiar with this. I've tried to soak up as much hours as I could, trying to watch the event, watch some of the interviews after the event, trying to kind of piece together everything that happened. But the long story short of it is there's a local church here in the area that's gotten really popular in the last few years, and it has that edge of like culture warrior against kind of the social justice warriors. And so remember that a couple of years ago, everybody who was woke was a social justice warrior. So you've seen then the rise of the culture warrior to go and contend against the social justice warrior in the common marketplace of the internet and social debate. And I don't know, you bring your group to the park and we'll bring our group to the park. And it's a little bit like West Side Story. Like everybody should just come in snapping their fingers, it might as well be that. And anyway, so you're having this rise in culture warriors that are of a Christian kind of background or persuasion. And they're merging then these things together in real potent ways. And I think in that, what happens too, because now you're thinking not like an ambassador, which is what I think Christians should think like, and you're thinking like a warrior. And if it's in the name of Christ, then you're kind of allowed to do anything if it's for the sake and name of Christ. Like, I remember there was a quote I'd come across one time. I think I've even mentioned it on the podcast. I certainly used it on a Sunday morning, where it was like, if you give a person a sword and say, you can use this sword in the name of Jesus because you're going to answer to him for one day for whatever you do, there's almost a mindset that says whatever it takes to fight for Jesus is okay because it's for Jesus. I think it throws back to the Hebrew scriptures and like the invasion of the Israelites into their ancestral homeland, where it was like, there's no rules, right? You can split a mother open and tear out the baby from her belly, and if it's in the name of God, it's okay, right? So I think that same kind of mentality kind of oozes in when we go, if it's for Christ, whatever we need to do this side of killing a person, and even in some ways we say this side of physically harming a person, we can kind of do. Now, in other times, in other places, in other parts of just global culture, even the violence thing has been a part of Christianity, and we've justified the violence for the sake of spreading the kingdom of Christ and the gospel and that kind of thing. That's in our history. That's not what the current climate is now, but there's still kind of this idea of you can do whatever you need to do and say whatever you need to say and have whatever tone you need to have because you got to win this cultural battle. And if Christianity is on the ropes in our culture and it's being threatened in our culture, you just have to fight the fire with the fire. You got to pick up a rock because they're throwing a rock and this is what you need to do, right? So I think there's some of that tone in there. Now with this event, I want to be clear that the Christians that were a part of it were not physically violent in any way. They did not engage in physical altercation when physical altercations erupted. It seems that was much more contained to law enforcement and some of the people that were opposed to this Christian event. And so I want to be really clear that the Christians did not engage in the physical stuff at all. But that isn't to say that they didn't show up with the agenda to provoke something. And then they knew, based on where they were at, that provoking that thing would not be a hard thing to provoke, all right? So again, I go back to, there's this church in our general area that's gotten really popular. It's now multi-site, has a leader that has a very clear tone. Like you can't mistake what kind of their priority is, right? They admit that they're very political. They admit that they're more of a charismatic kind of Pentecostally Christian. They admit that they're trying to be provocative. I think even use the word obnoxious was one of the words that this leader used in relationship to kind of how they do things. So, they're already kind of in a space where they're trying to poke the bear, or they're poking at the wasp nest, so to speak, because they're in a more liberal part of the country. And I think what happens when you're in a space like that for more conservative type people, maybe more Christian type people, is they already feel marginalized, right? So, if I'm in a blue state and I'm in the blue side of a blue state, right? Like, so you go over to Spokane, very red, very conservative. You come over here to the greater Seattle area, much more dominated by maybe more of a left-leaning, more Democrat, more, again, blue kind of tone. And yet you're a very red person and a person that is a Christian. You feel marginalized. At times you feel a little mocked. You feel a little pushed around. You feel a little bit like people look at you like you're a little broken because you hold a faith. You go to your workplace and they're forcing, like June Pride Month more on you. Like you need to identify with support of this. And if you don't, you're a little bit looked at from a side eye. And so there's all these pressures, right? Every time you vote, your candidate doesn't win. It's like that kind of thing that happens, I think, in the world that I kind of am adjacent to here. And so then when you have a religious person rise up and then they are very, quote, red and very, bold in the sense of they just say it like it is, there can be a gravity of like, here is kind of our leader. Here's the one that's the champion for us in a culture that we feel beat down in. And now they're going to lift us up, or at least when we all come together, we feel like that's right. We are a crew. It's in that sense, it's no different than kind of the psychology that drives a gang. And I don't mean it to say that it's a gang now. I just mean the psychology that drives a gang or a clan, a really connected team. There's a sense of identity and camaraderie that happens against the odds, against a greater culture that may be against you in some way, or you perceive as against you. And so it kind of creates this thing and it breeds this thing. So we saw this with Mars Hill a number of years ago. Like Mark was that counter voice in a culture, and a compelling counter voice. I think it takes that too. Now we have this leader in this church, and he's a compelling counter voice to the culture, and much more, I would say, bombastic than Driscoll was back in the day with Mars Hill. Now Driscoll, though, is much more bombastic than Driscoll was in the day at Mars Hill. And so I think people rally to all of this. I think the other thing that's happening right now is there is a really interesting movement that I mocked, 12 years ago. I'm like, this ain't a thing. It's called the New Apostolic Reformation. I'm like, this is so dumb. This is not a real thing. No, it's a real thing, and it's a real thing kind of made up of more Pentecostal leading religious leaders that are also profoundly political and profoundly political, leaning hard to the right. And this is where you even hear of things like Christian nationalism, which I know is maybe an overplayed idea. But there is a sense in which they're like, no, we are nationalists and we are Christians, and we do think you can use a bit more force and a bit more bite to get things done, and this is what's going to get things done. And so you have this kind of confluence of religion and politics that is a little bit more on the farther right-leaning side of the equation, and then it's kind of self-justifying that, hey, we can do things the way we're doing them to get things done. So we have that firmly planted in our area right now. This church is certainly trying to make waves and makes waves with billboards that are provocative and bitey, and you're just kind of like, oh man, does that sound like Jesus? Is that loving your neighbor, and is that loving your enemy and everything else? And so it's been there for a while. During COVID, it was a very vocal church against our governor and against lockdowns and against the masks and against these different mandates. And so they've gained traction over the course of time by being, again, kind of a provocateur against the general liberal Democrat kind of entrenchment here in the greater Seattle area. Anyway, I know that's a lot of background. So they go and they have this group called Mayday USA, which it's kind of like they're doing events, right? And I don't know if I'd call it a rally. I don't know if I'd call it an event. I don't know if I'd call it a protest. I don't know if I'd call it a worship service, because it kind of does all those things. Now, the way it's been pitched in kind of national media, if it's to the right, this was just a Christian worship service. If it's to the left, it's pitched a little bit more like this was a protest rally. And I would say it's doing both at the same time. It has that kind of edge, right? So they applied for a permit to do this event somewhere in a Seattle park. They had other parks that they wanted. They didn't get those parks from the city. Instead, the city gives them Cal Anderson Park, which is, like in the hub of the pride community of Seattle, right? So this is where the George Floyd protests, when they happened, and we had the autonomous zone for like 6 weeks, right? Where it was like, we don't belong to anybody. We're all our own space. It's that same place, right? So it's already a very different kind of place than a lot of places in Seattle. Like, it's just a different vibe down there. I've been down there. I went down there during the George Floyd stuff. When it was the autonomous zone, I hung out for the day and just talked to people and everything else. And so I can't say I'm intimately in tune with it, but I know what happens down in Capitol Hill. I kind of know the area. I know the park. I know the people that kind of live around there. and that the city said, hey, we're going to give this church, which I have no doubt the city's very aware of this church and the personality of the leadership of the church. They kind of knew, like, oh, this is going to start a problem. They have to know. Like, I honestly, and I'm not here to defend really the city or the mayor or whatever else, but at the same time, I don't want to be like, oh, they did nothing wrong, they were clueless, whatever else. No, there's probably, I got to always be careful with motive, but I'm like, okay, this is probably the most vocal, political, right-leaning church in our community. It's one of the most provocative churches in our community, and you know that they're very opposed to the Pride community, and you just gave them a permit for the primary park in the middle of the Pride community. Like, there's a thing there, right? Well, I think also with that, for then the organization, the church, they have to make some decisions. Like, wow, we have a permit. We can go and do a, let's say at best, a worship service down in the Pride community. How would Jesus have us come into that place and do ministry to those people? What are some of the things that we might do? Now, some of the things you might do is give free bikes away and give free haircuts, because they did. They gave free bikes. They gave free haircuts. They were giving away stuff. I think maybe food or something like that too. So I go, that's awesome. That's fantastic. But what else might you do, right? Well, again, you might go and just hang out in coffee shops and in pubs and different locations where you begin to rub shoulders with people and begin to get to know them and everything else, and invite them to your event. And then it's an event that would be very inspiring and uplifting and encouraging and show the beauty of Jesus, and do it in such a way that is like a missionary, right? Missionaries don't go into other cultures and just highlight, like, here's all the ways your culture is wrong and bad and broken. No, you go in and you give to the culture in some ways. You figure out what makes the culture tick. You make friends with the culture. Like, I think that is healthy missionary activity, You don't go in and just start talking about how the women aren't wearing tops in this African tribe and they need to put on clothes. As a missionary, you're going to fail, right? So instead, you just realize this is how this culture works, and we're going to build relationship with this culture, and we're going to make an investment in this culture, and we're going to love this culture and help them in their infrastructure and give them whatever they need in that sense. And as we build relationship, we then build credibility, and with that equity, we can begin to have conversations about how Jesus changes things, and that would be an awesome way to do it, but that's not really what happened here. So they show up at the event, they put on a big stage, big girders, big banner that says, don't mess with our kids, right? So automatically, we're coming into a space and we're putting up a banner, not Jesus is rad, the kingdom's beautiful, love your neighbor, whatever the thing you put, don't mess with our kids, which is kind of like a cat call in in this debate between kind of the woke and anti-woke warriors, where a lot of people on the right go, the Pride community is going after our kids. The Pride community is dangerous for our kids. The Pride community wants to destroy our kids. And so that's your primary branding. Your label, like the giant banner across your stage, is reminding everybody, here's how we see you. You're predatory. So if you're going to be a missionary to a group of people, what you don't tend to want to do is put up a big banner that says, hey, all you predators, hey, come and listen to us. Like, it's not going to be terribly helpful, right? That's A. B, the color scheme they chose for their graphics and for the banners that they hung on the sides of the stage were the transgender flag, right? So they picked kind of the blue and pink colors as their color scheme with this big banner that says, don't mess with our kids. And certainly much of this debate right now is around, does the Pride community, are they trying to co-opt kids that are maybe a little bit confused about their gender or about their sexuality? Are they super pressing to see all these kids converted, see all these kids go through, transition and everything else? And so it's like this narrative, right? That is clearly alive in society, and then from that they doubled down in that event and said, we're gonna elevate that narrative like pretty exhaustively, and so that's what they did. And so it was no wonder then that you had people that came out going, okay, so you're calling us predatory. You're using our colors. You're in our park. We already know there's a great deal of tension between your faith system and how your faith system sees us and our way of life and how we live that life. There's not a lot of love between those groups. And so you've engineered everything for a conflict, right? And it doesn't matter how many bikes you give away and how many worship songs you sing, because even as I watched it, I mean, the tone is that very almost like blowhorn Christianity on the street corner. It wasn't they didn't send Tim Keller in there. They didn't send Rick Warren in there. They didn't send in, Andy Stanley. They didn't send in the people that are kind of a little bit, they didn't, pick your person that tends to be a little bit more of an ambassador when you go into a very foreign American environment and try to promote the kingdom of Jesus. They didn't send that in there. It was, again, kind of the prosperity gospel tone, a lot of really edgy bite, a lot of shouting amidst all of it. And then at one point into the thing, they put up a giant QR code that says you can give to what we're doing, right? So like passing the plate digitally, so to speak, at an outreach event, allegedly, they're in a pride saturated park. Like I can't help but look at that and go, you kind of know what you're doing. You know what you're doing at two levels. One, you're wanting to provoke that community. If you happen to just reach that community, great. But that's not what you're going in there to do. You're going in there to provoke that community. In the provocation, you're trying to get press so that those on your side will go, there is our champion, which is why they raised almost $700,000 from that event and that QR code that went up. I guarantee you it wasn't a bunch of, queers and transgender people and, whatever, particular part of the flag that was represented. Like, I guarantee you they were not the ones giving money to the event, right? But what it was armchair Christians elsewhere that said, yeah, that's right. Those are our champions. Those are our warriors. That's our gladiator in the arena fighting for us in their space. I'm going to give them some money for that. And I go, you kind of know what you're doing. As they've gained press and notoriety from this, that's kind of what they're doing. So from the whole thing, it erupts into this big brawl from, people, and I would agree. I think it was people on the far right. I wasn't there to know everything that happened. I've seen video footage of the different things. Certainly, I don't condone the violence that was instigated. I shared this on Sunday. I feel very much for the police officers that got chucked in the middle of that. They even had a statement going, what was the city doing? And I go, yeah, I get you, man. I feel you. I agree. What was the city doing? I go, like, somebody at the city knew what they were doing, I assume, and knew that it would cause this, and they maybe wanted that. So, again, I don't condone that. At the same time, here's what I also know. Don't look at the whole thing that happened and say there was really just two groups. There was just the Christian group, and then there was the violent left group. There was actually multiple things down there all at the same time. There was also very peaceful Christians that don't agree with what this church does. They were down there as kind of a counter voice. There was also very peaceful, like just pride flag wearing grandpas and grandmas that were down there, and they weren't being violent. They were just peacefully protesting. So again, it's like what I found when I went down for the George Floyd stuff. Everybody put it as like, there's two sides and that's all there is. And I'm like, there's never just two sides. And certainly at this event, it wasn't just two sides, just as much as the George Floyd stuff and the Black Lives Matter stuff. There wasn't just two sides and two voices and that was it. There's always kind of a strata of different things happening in play at a same event, right? At the same time. So anyway, blows up, everything else, all gets all crazy. But again, I go, it's what they actually were going for. If the mission statement wasn't reach lost people for Jesus, really, the mission statement was incite lost people to be against Jesus. And I have a major problem with that. Like, I have a super major problem with that. Because A, you're not helping the true kingdom cause. You're helping a certain moral cause for a certain kind of nation that you want, that whether it's truly Jesus-like or not is almost immaterial as long as it's called Christian. And this is increasingly what I get concerned about, like that we're beginning to redefine what Christ defined our faith as into this other thing, right? That it's very American, it's very macho, it's very aggressive, it's very political, and it doesn't really try to even work very hard to do the hard stuff of Jesus. Like, and it doesn't embrace the way Jesus kind of architected this whole thing. It literally just blows it up and says, no, man, because hey, as long as we're singing songs and as long as we're talking about Jesus and as long as we're talking about morals, we're nailing it. And if we're hurting people's feelings, tough, your feelings, get over your feelings, you snowflake or whatever it is. And it's just completely missing how Jesus did everything, right? Like I said on Sunday with our church, when I talked about this a little bit, I'm like, I just take the event and go, how would it have looked if Jesus would have gone down to Cal Anderson Park instead of this group? Like, what would he have done differently, right? Had Jesus been there, who would he have reprimanded? Who would he have scolded as that day unfolded, right? Like I honestly look through that lens, and you may look and go, oh man, he would have been all over those Antifa people. He would have been lifting up this church and saying, thank you guys. You guys are bold. You guys rock. That's right. Don't touch our kids. Don't mess with our kids. Like use those colors some more. And like, would he do that? Or would he be like, man, I'm going to go have lunch over with these people over here. These people that you're calling sinners, these are my friends that I'm going to have a meal with right now. And I'm going to go chill with them for a bit, because that's kind of what he gets busted for in the Gospel of Luke, right? Like the religious people roll in, like, why are you being friends with those people, man? He's like, because that's who I came for. And then he actually condemns the religious people for basically being hateful toward people that don't believe, people who are lost, people who need the loving touch of grace and this kingdom that Jesus is bringing into the world that's upside down and backwards and does everything so different. So I really did. I just started looking at it, and I'm like, I don't think really this event reminds me much of Jesus. It may be, quote, Christian. It may be, quote, ethical or moral or whatever we want to call it, forgetting that ethics and morals driven through the grid of the kingdom begin to look a little different. And it may even be very bold, but I think it's bold in a way that is opposite of what Jesus calls us to do, to be bold, right? So the event gets underway, blows up, is ended for the day, everything else. And now there is the backlash from this church and the leadership. And then honestly, I would say very religious, not religious, very politically minded news outlets in our area start to grab onto it. And the narrative is like these Christians were just down there to pray and sing, and they got attacked by Antifa, right? And these poor folks were just doing this, and they were basically minding their own business and not looking for trouble. They were just giving stuff away, and free bikes, free haircuts, free food, and then, man, they just got jumped. And I'm kind of like, man, okay, like, if I flipped it, let's say I decided to show up to, I don't know, man, like, you pick your, I go to a NASCAR race in Tennessee, right? And I show up that NASCAR race, and that NASCAR race is also Armed Forces Day. It's celebrating veterans and everything else. And I set up a worship service where I'm giving away haircuts and free bikes. But my worship service has the American flag, but it's all in pride colors. And I talk about how the fact I have a big banner that says, Christians are hypocrites across my thing. And I'm doing all of this stuff, and I'm like, hey, man, I'm not causing trouble. Yeah, we're doing songs about pacifism. We're doing songs about how, you shouldn't support guns. And, like if you did that kind of thing in that kind of location, people would be like, well, you're not there really just to just be an encouragement to that community. You're there to provoke a fight. Like, that's what you'd be doing. Like, if I rolled in and did that someplace that's very conservative and very patriotic and very whatever, like, they would be offended by that. And I go, understandably, like, I get that. Like, if you're trying to go and offend a person, that's a great way to do it. In the same way, if you want to go offend a person, this is the way you do it down in Cal Anderson Park. So the mission was offense. Mission accomplished. And then from that, it was we were just the sad victims of this violence. We didn't do anything wrong. We were just there to be helpful, which I'm like, nah, man. Come on, dude. Like, I get some are going to be, that's right. But anybody who watches it and really just drives it through the grid of what's really going on, you're going to be like, that wasn't the thing. Again, I don't condone the violence, but I'm saying you're not innocent in the whole thing. So then after that, they start this whole thing of demanding an apology from the mayor, right? Because they were attacked and persecuted in this venue. And I go, once again, not like Jesus, this idea of I'm going to demand an apology for my persecution. Jesus says, hey, when you're persecuted, leap for joy. He didn't say demand an apology from the powers that be. And then, there was a rally a couple of days later down at the city hall. And in the rally, I'm watching an interview again with the leader of this church. And he says, the mayor thought that, we were just going to roll over and piss all over ourselves, but he picked the wrong church to pick a fight with. And again, I thought, if you're just running it through the red letters of Jesus, that whole concept of, we're not going to roll over and piss all over ourselves. We're here for a fight. We're here to be bold because, and he quotes A.W. Pink on, Jesus wants a bold church to where, this is where I'm going to get to the core of this now. There was this thing of like, no, the fight is warranted. The way we're fighting is okay. In fact, the way we're fighting is going to rally more people to fight our cause. And we're going to take this to LA and Miami and New York and Chicago and all this kind of stuff, right? We're going to have this kind of eruption of confrontation because we're making much of Jesus. And Jesus came to be confrontational. Jesus came to take people on. And I'm like, right, I agree. Jesus came to be bold. I totally agree. Jesus calls us to be bold. I agree. Jesus calls us to be confrontational. I agree. But in no way like the way it's being done. Here's what I mean. His kingdom's upside down and backwards. So he makes it very clear. The greatest or the least, the first or the last. You want to be the best, you got to be the servant of all. So just that structure there lets us know whatever way the world does stuff to get stuff done, Jesus does it the opposite of the world's way. So with that, then I look at everything that's unfolding here and I go, okay, if I drive it through the grid of the place that I've been camping for a while, Sermon on the Mount, right? Because I push that all the time with you guys. I do, but there's a reason, right? I go, how does it open up? Beatitudes, poor in spirit. Do I see any poverty of spirit in what I'm hearing here? No, I see a lot of arrogance. I see a lot of pride. I see a lot of, again, kind of tough talk. I see a lot of talking about being bold in the way that Antifa is also bold, I guess, and Black Lives Matter is also bold, and also, the Me Too movement was bold. In other words, it's the same kind of earthly boldness just being now applied to this labeled Christian boldness, right? So I go, it's not poor in spirit. It doesn't reek a poverty of spirit. It's just not there. And then you get it into the idea of meekness and mourning, right? There's never been, as I listen to the leaders of these movements, this idea of really being saddened for the pride community, saddened for the brokenness of our world, saddened like Jesus rides into Jerusalem and he's weeping over it. I hear a lot more punchiness, a lot more critical spirit, a lot more borderline slander about people that they don't agree with, or certainly just, again, a sharpness, like a judgmental, like, we're better than you. You're a sinner. We're not, right? It's the Pharisee on the step of the temple that's like, thank you, Lord, I'm not like those people over there, right? Where you got the tax collector beating his chest and saying, I'm not worthy. So I go, there's no mourning over the sin. There's just more of like a super criticism about sinners. There's no true meekness. Like the word meekness means strength under control in some ways. It also really has the communication of a gentle persuasion. Like there's no gentle persuasion going on here. The idea of being like peacemaking. No, you're actually trying to antagonize a thing. And when it comes to persecution, instead of, again, just receiving it with joy and knocking the dust off your robe and moving on your way, you're using it as a chance for more press. You're filing lawsuits and you're demanding apologies. And I go, this is just not what Jesus prescribed for us. Then you fast forward further into the Sermon on the Mount, where he's like, hey, man, when it comes to the way the world's going to mistreat you, you don't retaliate. If they demand this, you give them extra. If they make you go a mile, you go two. If they slap you on the one cheek, you turn the other. And again, this isn't capitulation. It's not rolling over and pissing on ourselves, right? Like, I'm just like, oh my goodness, man. But it does demand like some moral imagination of a third way where you can highlight like the poor behavior of others, but not by you being like the giant yelling, screaming mirror to do that, or even doing the same thing in kind of retribution to it, but you're figuring out a different way where they can see your honest, sincere, good, caring works. This is 1 Peter. They can see that and go, man, we're embarrassed that we treated you so poorly, right? Because I guarantee you, nobody on the left that did what they did that day is thinking like, I'm so ashamed for my actions against that group. Because that group didn't roll in and really show grace and generosity and friendship and love of neighbor or love of enemy. They just rolled in and they poked the bear. So that's kind of what happened. Then you go a little bit further into the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, hey, man, the bottom line is just love your enemies. Like, it's easy to love those who love you. He gets into that in Luke. It's like, big deal. You love your own, so what? Big deal. You'll loan to people that you love and trust, so what? He's like, here's what matters. When you loan to those who you don't know and may not trust, when you love those who don't love you and want bad for you, you still want good for them. So you bless them, do good for them, and pray for them, right? Like, even when that happened, there was an interview with the leader of this whole movement, and at the end of the interview, they said, hey, would you do a prayer for the mayor? And I'm listening to the prayer, and it is the most like super canned, again, televangelist prayer that it wasn't like, man, like I really ache for this person. I really hurt for this person. You can disagree with the person, but the more you disagree with the person, the more you should ache for the person you disagree with. If it's the way of Jesus, like that's the way it should be. This idea of like just the drawn lines and I don't really love my enemy is just not in the equation for what Jesus promotes. And so that was in there too, right? So I'm just walking through all of this on top of then what I always talk about, the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, long suffering, gentleness, self-control. That stuff, man, I'm just getting all worked up. Just has not been present. Just has not been present. And this is why I bring it back to the upside down way of Jesus requires what I would call true boldness, because it takes true boldness to love an enemy. It takes true boldness to turn the other cheek. It takes true boldness to give up double when one thing is required of you. It takes true boldness to leap for joy when you're persecuted. It takes true boldness to be meek when you want to fight and retaliate. It takes true boldness to say, you know what, you hate me, but I'm going to press into you anyway. It takes true boldness to show up at a place like Cal Anderson Park and not look with a self-righteous judgment, but realize you have a plank in your own eye. Don't so much focus on the specks in their eyes right now. Focus on the plank in your own eye, and then try to figure out, how do I make table with these people, and how do I show love to these people? How do I build community with these people so that I can show Jesus to these people? Because if you really want to show Jesus to people who feel that your people hate them, it's a long road. It's a marathon. And what you can't do is roll in with a big production and a big banner and provoke a thing and then act as though, hey, man, I just preached the gospel. The gospel is not simply this message of sinner and cross and resurrection turned saint, right? Like, it is much bigger than that. And the proof of that is I just look at how things were done in the Gospels and Acts, right? They were done differently. They were done differently, right? And yeah, did Paul get his butt kicked when he would roll into a community? You bet he did sometimes. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but also look how Paul responds to the butt kicking. It's not this. It's not this. It's a very different thing. Very different thing. And that's because he's mimicking the Jesus thing. And that is a very different thing. And I think that's what matters here. And so, yeah, I do admit I get a little worked up about this because I go, you are making my job so much harder, right? Like, I think about it as a pastor just in my community. It has taken years for me to build relationships and enough social equity with people who think we hate them and they hate us back, right? To build enough social equity to build some bridges to the very people that tend to go, Christians just hate us, where they go, but that group seems a little different, right? I've been in this community for 17 years, and I've only really probably cared about this in the last, like, I don't know, maybe 10 or so, in part because God plunked me down with a gay kid. Like, God's like, hey, man, here's how I'm going to give you a heart for this community that needs to know my love too. And so, yeah, with that, that's true, but I know how hard it is. And I know how easy it is to just provoke and to pick a fight and then get the people rallied to my side who are going to say, thank you, man, for having the courage to say the unpopular, right? Because I hate to say it, the courage to say the unpopular is now popular, right? Like, honestly, that's the thing. The courage to say the unpopular is the most popular thing to do, whether it's on the left or the right, man. You're going to rally people. That's what it is. But I think the Jesus way, it's a third way that isn't about how do I say the most unpopular thing to be popular, but how do I actually do a more unpopular thing, which is to really go and love people that may be unpopular with either one of the groups, that I'm functioning as an ambassador, not a capitulator and not as a culture warrior, but as an ambassador to a thing that's different. How do we act as emissaries? How are we acting as like true bridge builders instead of wall builders, and instead of criticizers, and instead of being more politically motivated? Like, how can we be more kingdom motivated, Jesus motivated? Because that's what matters, right? That's just what matters. And I think that's what's going to count. And so, man, I've gone on enough with this. And I don't even know if it's going to be as cogent as I hope, but I do hope that we all, because here's what I'm seeing happen. I'm seeing people that really do go, man, I love Jesus. I love the Bible. I want Jesus' best. But they're getting worked up in the political environments, right? And they're probably getting a little bit more of the preaching in their ear from the pundits and kind of ideological voices than they are Jesus. And then they just kind of get pulled into it and they get worked up and they go, that's right, these poor Christians are getting beat up and that's wrong, and they got attacked and all they did is had a worship service and everything else, and this is wrong and the left is crazy and we got to fight them, and you just get drawn in. And in that, then you're missing how you're actually slowly boiling the frog in the kettle in a different kind of way. Like, you think you're not, you're actually thinking, no, this is how we're going to defend Christianity against the frog in the kettle mentality. And I'm like, No, the frog in the kettle mentality comes in all sorts of forms. And I think one of those is the defense of religion in the name of Christ, but in a way that is truly Christless from the way he told us to do things. Like, I do see that pretty strongly in play. Like, it is doctrinally laden, it is ethically laden, it is religiously laden, but it is very void of the real boots on the ground way that Jesus told us to do things and the way Jesus modeled his life and the lives of others. And I think it's why Jesus rails against religion so much. I think he does. And I think the writers of the Gospels bring up that, I mean, because it's a ton. Like, the amount of conflict between Jesus and religion comes up in the Gospels. It's dense. And you wonder why. Like, Matthew's got only so much space to write. Luke, the same way. Why is it constantly highlighting the danger of religion or Jesus having conflicts with religion? I believe all the gospel writers are writing to Christians, and they know we are so prone to this. Like, as the church grows, it'll be so prone to religion. It'll be so prone to be like Pharisees. Let's put all these stories in there about Jesus confronting that, because it's his way of confronting his church for the next 2,000 years and beyond, right? I think those stories are there to confront us as the church because we love to play the role of the Pharisee. And all of this to me is playing the role of the Pharisee. It's playing the role of religion. It thinks it loves God. It thinks it loves the scriptures. It thinks it loves God's agenda. And yet it's nothing what Jesus modeled. And that is, to me, a big gaping problem. Like, that is a giant missing of the target, and we're defending it. And I don't think we should defend it. I think we should confront it in a loving way. We should adjust and get back to the Jesus way and not do the Pharisee way, because the Pharisee way is getting a lot of press right now. The religious way is getting a lot of notoriety, and it's going to get a lot of airtime, and it's going to rally a lot of people. And that makes sense, because people like conflict, right? And they like champions. We're ambassadors, right? We're emissaries. We're all about the business of building embassies in our communities where people can come and they can find the love of Jesus in a very radical and different way. And so that's our mission. That's what we get to do. And I hope we will all begin to own that as everyday missionaries.